Shadows stretched long as the sun dipped below the horizon. A wave of darkness rolled across the sleepy farm, enveloping the fields in an eerie hush. The air was thick and heavy, a shroud of silence settling over the land. But that silence was deceptive, hiding secrets that were about to unravel. As dusk descended, a sense of unease hung in the air. The farmer, an old man named Tom, stood on his porch, his weathered hands gripping a steaming mug of coffee. He squinted into the fading light, scanning the fields that had been his life's work. Years of toil had woven stories into every furrow of dirt, every rustling crop. And tonight something felt off. Tom had seen it all in his decades on that land. Seasons of plenty, years of drought, and storms that howled like wild beasts. But tonight there was a different kind of storm brewing, one made of treachery and shadows. Just as the last rays of sun vanished, he noticed movement near the barn. 3 figures, their forms wavering in the twilight, ducked low, trying to blend into the darkness. He narrowed his eyes, pulse quickening. People didn't come by at this hour. Trusting what he'd learned over a lifetime, he felt that something was intensely wrong. The figures crept along the edge of the barn, the sound of their soft whispers carried by the cool evening breeze. Tom placed his mug down softly, concern knitting his brow. He pulled on a worn jacket, the fabric heavy with the scent of years spent in the land. With each cautious step he took toward the barn, he tried to piece together who these intruders might be. Could they be lost travelers, or were they up to something more sinister? He felt a tingle of determination, a surge of protectiveness over the life he had built. As he approached, the low voices escalated to hushed whispers, revealing their intentions. "No, we can't go back now." "That's when they will find us," one voice warned, filled with fear and urgency. The words hung in the air, sending a chill down Tom's spine. His resolve hardened. He was no stranger to trouble. He defended his land before. He had faced off against weathered storms and the cruel bite of winter, and he wasn't about to let some shadowy figures run rampant across what he loved. Crouched behind the wooden fence, he listened, heart racing. The figures had shifted. He caught glimpses of their anxious faces, young, frightened, desperation etched in every line. "We can't trust anyone," another voice insisted, trembling with intensity. "If they find us, it's over." Plan? What plan? Tom's mind raced. His protective instincts flared. He'd protect his home, yes, but he couldn't turn a blind eye to those seeking help. But the thought sent a rush of uncertainty coursing through him. Could they be dangerous, and what was it they were hiding from? As he wrestled with these thoughts, he caught a movement out of the corner of his eye. The unmistakable silhouette of a figure appeared at the edge of his property, silhouetted against the darkening sky. This was no ordinary visitor. This was the local sheriff, a gruff man named Hank who had patrolled these fields for years. Hank's catch out of the corner of his eye mirrored Tom's own. He stepped onto the property with a slow, deliberate gait, eyes scanning before they landed on Tom's hiding spot. He raised an eyebrow as if asking for an explanation. There was no time, they had to act. Tom motioned Hank over, the urgency in his gaze unmistakable. "They're in the barn," he whispered, keeping his voice low. "I think they're in trouble." Understanding passed between them, a silent agreement to investigate. Hart nodded, his expression steely. Together they crept closer, weaving through the shadows toward the barn's gnarled doors. The sound of terrified whispers became clearer, almost audible. Tom's heart thudded like a drum in his chest, each beat echoing the weight of their unknown fate. With a slight push, the doors creaked open and an electric gust of cold air burst forth. The moonlight pooled inside, illuminating scattered tools and shadowed corners, but the 3 figures still lurked in the darkness. They were huddled together, stifling sobs, eyes wide with fear. Tom called out, his voice booming with authority yet layered with concern. "What are you doing here?" Startled, the figures jumped, swirling like startled deer caught in headlights. They turned to face him, revealing weary, dirt-smudged skin and eyes that carried the weight of fear too heavy for their slender frames. They stepped into the light hesitantly, revealing their true faces, 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl, along with a man who looked exhausted beyond his years. The boy's hands trembled as he took a step forward, his voice shaking. "Please, we didn't mean to trespass. Tom exchanged a concerned look with Hank, who stood rigidly beside him. Tom echoed, incredulous. The man stepped closer, shoulders slumping in defeat. His voice drifted off, weighed down by unspoken fears from something bad. Tom's protective instincts battled with the gnawing sense of vulnerability. It was a risk sheltering the hunted. "What's pursuing you?" The girl took a deep breath, steeling herself. "There's a gang that runs these back roads. They thought they could take what we have. We lost everything." Her voice wavered, but held a raw resilience that struck Tom's heart. The peace began to fall into place. Familiar whispers of misfortunes had swept through town about this gang. They had terrorized families, leaving a path of devastation that nothing could heal. Tom felt his heart race, not just for the safety of his land, but for their lives. "Okay," he sighed, lowering his voice to a softer note. "You can stay here tonight, but you have to promise you'll be as quiet as shadows." The palpable relief in the room felt almost electric. They nodded, gratitude flooding their eyes as they stepped deeper into the barn, far from the world outside. Tom motioned for Hank to follow him outside for a moment, the door creaking shut behind them. Tom asked, worry tightening his chest, We'll keep watch, Hank said firmly, setting his jaw. But you need to know something. If we get caught in this mess, it won't just be the kids who are in danger. I know, Tom replied, feeling the weight of his land pressing down on him like an unwanted burden, but I won't turn my back on them. As they took up their positions against the barn's weathered walls, the night unfolded into silence. The moon floated high, a haunting silver orb illuminating the skies, casting jagged shadows over the fields. Minutes turned to hours as they settled into an uneasy watch. As the clock ticked forward, nerves tightened the air between the two men. Every rustle of the leaves, every whisper of the wind felt laden with dread. Finally, just as they began to feel the weight of dread creep away, headlights pierced the dark like searching talons. A low growl of an engine rumbled through the night, drawing closer and closer. A vehicle approached the farm, its aim undeniable, the unmistakable harassment of the gang that had laid waste to the lives of so many. Tom hissed, his voice a quick burst of urgency as they retreated back into the barn. The kids glanced up, eyes wide and terrified, and he quickly gestured for them to huddle in the darkest corner, hearts thumping as they looked to their unlikely guardians. Tom felt like a dam was about to break, the fear creeping under his skin. He risked a peek through a crack in the barn doors, his heart hammering as men poured out of the truck. They moved like predators, prowling the yard with a feral instinct. One man barked, his voice slithering into the night. Tom felt rage boil under the surface. They wouldn't take what was his land, his life, the lives of these innocent kids. He glanced at Hank, knowing the risk they were about to take. On three, we step out and grab their attention, Tom murmured, barely containing the tremor in his voice. We'll draw them away. Hank nodded, steely resolve reflecting in his hardened eyes. They counted, breaths shaky and intense, until they burst through the barn doors together, a wave of protective energy crashing over them. Tom shouted, raising his voice, echoing a lifetime of confidence. The gang turned, surprise morphing into fury as they spotted the men standing tall before them, eyes blazing with venom. Should have stayed hidden, old man, the leader snarled, drawing closer, eyes narrowing. Yeah, I stand my ground, Tom shouted, his heart thudding louder in his chest, echoing the courage he felt in that moment. A beat of silence stretched before the air throbbed with tension. Hank stepped forward, his broad shoulders blocking the view of the barn. The leader sneered, a twisted grin slicing across his face. Protect this farm, protect these kids. In that moment, the fight was brewing, an invisible current swirling around them. Hank lunged, and Tom followed suit, adrenaline surging as they braced for impact. The gang retreated slightly, caught off guard, but they quickly regrouped. Tom and Hank stood back to back, lines drawn as the world faded away, the barn, the fields. It was just them now, brothers in arms against the oncoming storm. The confrontation erupted into chaos, shouts echoing against the night sky. Tom felt every punch, every shove resonate through him, fueled by the raw necessity to protect. The figures of the frightened teens were a flickering reminder of purity amidst the shadows of brutality. It felt like ages passed, but in reality, it was mere moments. As the battle raged on, Tom suddenly saw the girls' faces flash through his mind, determination wrapped in fear. It sparked something inside him, fueled a fire he didn't know existed. Sweat beaded on his brow as his fists flew, each blow echoing the weight of sacrifice. There would be no running away tonight. This farm was more than land, the air filled with every breath of fight and every turn of fate. It was his life, and it was worth all of him. Finally, as breaths grew heavier and fists fell limp, the gang retreated into the night. A cacophony of chaos dissolved as their battered forms faded, only to be swallowed by the darkness that had threatened once before. Tom stumbled back, leaning against the barn wall, a mix of disbelief and relief flooding over him. Hank stood tall beside him, breathing heavily but victorious. The barn doors creaked ever so slightly, revealing fearful eyes watching from within. Tom turned toward them, his heart aching at the sight. You're safe now, he assured them, relief weaving its way into every fiber of his being. Tears streamed down the girl's face as she rushed forward. Her voice cracked, heavy with the weight of terror lifted. The boy followed suit, gratitude flooding his features. The man stepped forward, clutching his chest, his voice choked with emotion. No, Tom replied, shaking his head as he stepped closer. You showed me what it means to protect. In that monumental moment, Tom understood what had driven him through the darkness. It was not merely the love for his land, but an unyielding love for those who needed protection against the shadows threatening to consume them. The night waned, and together they stood, a fortified unity against the dark, the farmer, the kids, and the goodness woven through the chill of night. And while shadows still lingered beyond the barn doors, the dawn would soon rise, bringing with it renewed hope and strength forged in the fiercest of nights. The night was still, a deep blanket of darkness wrapping the quiet farm like a secret. Crickets sang their nighttime chorus, and the moon hung high in the sky, casting silver beams over the fields. But beneath that serene surface lurked an unsettling pulse, a tension only the earth itself could sense. Tom, the farmer, was sleep-deprived and restless. He leaned against his porch railing, eyes scanning the far reaches of his land, taking in the familiar silhouette of the barns and fields. Years of hard work shaped this place, but tonight felt different. Tonight, a shadow loomed over the comforts he had built for himself and his family. He took a long swig from his coffee mug, savoring the warmth seeping through his calloused hands. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of movement near the barn. He squinted into the darkness, heart quickening. It was unusual for anyone to be out here this late, especially not trespassing. Gripping the porch post tightly, Tom watched intently as three figures crept closer to the barn's weathered doors. They moved like whispers, low and cautious, disappearing into the shadows. Fear coiled in Tom's gut. Who were they and what were they hiding from? He darted off the porch, every step purposeful, a deep-seated instinct rising within him. Each thud of his boots echoed against the wood, vibrating through the stillness. As he approached the barn, he could hear fragmentary whispers floating on the cool night air. "Over here, they might see us," one voice hissed, the panic palpable even at a distance. Tom crouched low behind a stack of hay bales. He peered towards the barn doors, adrenaline lacing his every thought. What had they done? Were they running from something dangerous? Every movie he had ever seen flashed through his mind, every horror story he could recall. He felt the weight of bile rise at the back of his throat. "Just a little longer," another voice urged, trembling with urgency. "If we can make it through the night." Tom felt an inexplicable wave of empathy. He had lived a life of toil and struggle, working hard to cling to what was his. He knew fear. He had felt it grip him in the dark nights of winter, of lost crops. But these voices spoke of a different kind of terror, far more profound and raw. With a deep breath, he stepped out from behind the hay. He demanded, his voice solid and unwavering. The figures froze, caught like deer in headlights. They turned slowly, revealing the faces of two teenagers and a man who looked weathered and worn, as though he had been fleeing for far too long. "Please," the man said, stepping forward. "We didn't mean to trespass. We just—" Tom questioned, the words hanging thick in the air. His instincts screamed that there was more to their story. "We're being hunted," the girl finally spoke, her voice quivering. "There's a gang after us, people who don't play by the rules." Tom's mind raced. He had heard whispers in town about a gang that lingered on the outskirts, terrorizing those who crossed their path. A chill ran down his spine, but there was a flicker of resolve deep within. He couldn't turn his back on them. This was more than a simple intrusion. This was a struggle for life and safety. "Okay," he said slowly, his voice steadying. "You can stay here tonight, but you have to be quiet." Relief swept across their faces, and Tom motioned for them to follow him into the barn, the air thick with unspoken fears. As they huddled inside, Tom glanced at Hank, his close friend and neighbor who had come to investigate the commotion. Hank leaned against the barn wall, folding his arms, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. Hank asked, voice low but heavy. "We keep watch," Tom replied, his own resolve strengthening. "But more than that, we protect them." Time crept onward and the night deepened. The wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in the barn as if whispering secrets. Tom felt the weight of everything resting on his shoulders. Had he made the right choice? Suddenly, the low growl of an engine broke the silence, sending a jolt through him. Hank shot him a look, awareness dawning in his eyes. They strained to hear the sound of tires crunching over gravel, drawing closer. Tom's heart began to race. "They're here," he whispered, fear lacing his words. Hank moved quickly, ensuring the kids were hidden behind barrels stacked in the far corner. Tom leaned against the barn door, every muscle tense and poised as the vehicle's headlights pierced through the darkness. The engine cut off with a low rumble, and they could hear footsteps crashing against the earth, brash and full of intent. One voice barked. Tom's breath hitched in his throat, and his fingers clenched into fists. He glanced at Hank, who was readying himself to defend. They hadn't come this far to let fear decide their fate. "On my count," Tom murmured, feeling the gravity of the moment. They nodded in agreement, adrenaline prickling with anticipation. 1, 2, they swung the barn doors open and stepped out, confronting the men who were advancing on the property. For a moment, surprise flickered across their faces, quickly replaced by steely resolve. "Get out of here, old man," the leader sneered, his eyes glinting like venom. "This is my fight," Tom declared, voice booming with authority. Hank stood beside him, muscles tense, and Tom could feel the power of their shared bravery emanate between them. They were standing against a storm, but it was a storm they were ready to confront. The gang wasn't ready for the defiance, hesitating for just a moment before charging forward. In an explosive flash, chaos erupted. Tom swung a fist that found its target, the confrontation unfolding like a well-rehearsed dance of desperation and defiance. The fight was brutal, a cacophony of grunts, shouts, and the harsh sound of flesh against flesh. Tom felt the adrenaline surging in his veins, emboldening him as he pushed back against those who sought to destroy lives to fulfill their own greed. As the battle raged, flashes of memories flickered through Tom's mind. The laughter of his children, the warmth of family dinners, the joy of blooming crops in spring. Each punch carried the weight of everything he had ever fought for. Finally, as fists and bodies collided, he could see the gang's resolve faltering, their numbers dwindling against the fire of his will. They could outrun the darkness in a chase, but tonight the light of hope was unwavering. The leader shouted, scrambling backward, his bravado dissipating with each second. As they retreated, Tom felt a rush of triumph, but there was no time to bask in victory. He called back to the kids in the barn. They quickly huddled together, eyes wide with disbelief and relief, the tension of fear slowly lifting. Tom led them out into the night, guiding them away from the farm and into a thicket of trees nearby. "Stay close," he instructed, breathless but resolute. Hank followed closely behind, scanning the dark edges of the land for any sign of lingering danger. As they crept through the trees, Tom glanced back at the silhouettes of the barn and fields, a stronghold of memories he had built over a lifetime. When they finally reached a small clearing, they stopped to catch their breath. The night was still again, though heavy with unspoken worries. Tom crouched down, looking each of them in the eye. "You're safe now," the man spoke up, taking a trembling breath. "We're just trying to escape. It was supposed to be a new start for our family, but the gang found us and destroyed everything we had." The girl nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "We just wanted to find peace, but they kept coming." Tom's heart ached at the thought of their pain. They were just kids caught in the ruthless tempest of violence and fear. "You're not alone anymore," he promised, voice steady. As the moon shifted high in the sky, the cool night air wrapped around them like a comforting embrace. It was at that moment Tom realized he had opened not just his home, but his heart to strangers in desperate need. Hours passed, silence wrapping around them like a protective cloak, and together they strategized, finding strength in their unity. They could face the coming dawn. As the first streaks of light broke over the horizon, they felt the weight of determination. Tom led them back, not knowing what awaited, but confident in his new resolve. The sun rose, casting golden hues over the fields, but it was their courage that created the warmth. Returning to the barn, they fortified themselves, gathering tools and preparing for whatever might come next. Tom's heart thrummed with anticipation. The battle might not be over, but it was just the beginning of their fight for a new dawn. The world outside might remain chaotic, but together they would stand strong. They had defied the dark, seen it for what it was, and chose to embrace the light. In the face of adversity, they had uncovered a truth buried deep in their souls. Together, they could confront anything, no matter how daunting. And as the sun rose higher, illuminating the fields, it heralded not just a new day, but a renewed spirit forged in the fire of courage. They had faced the shadows, and together they would learn to find their way into the light. The darkness swirled around the edges of the small farm like a thick fog, creeping silently over the fields where dreams had been buried and stubbornly reborn. Tom, the farmer, sat on his porch, an old rocking chair creaking lightly beneath him. He cradled a cup of coffee, the steam rising like whispers in the cool night air. The moon cast a silver glow over the crops, illuminating the hard work he had poured into these lands for over 20 years. But tonight, that calm was shattered when he noticed movement at the edge of the barn, a sudden flicker of shadows darting between the beams, barely visible yet undeniably there. Instincts kicked in. His mind raced as adrenaline flooded his body. Who would be out here at this hour? The world was quiet, too quiet. He set his mug down, the sound of ceramic against wood a crisp crack in the night. Curiosity took hold, pulling him off the chair and onto the ground, heart pounding like a war drum. Stepping into the shadows, he moved with careful intent, the grass bending under his worn boots. With each slow step, he pressed his ear against the cool wooden wall of the barn, trying to hear the whispers on the other side. A muffled voice broke through, strained and anxious. "We have to be quiet." Tom's pulse quickened. He muttered under his breath, too low for anyone else to hear. Shadows flitted in the barn like ghosts, faint shapes moving in a dance of trepidation. "Just stay close," another voice said, filled with a kind of fearful desperation. "We can't go back." The urgency in their words sent chills down Tom's spine. He knew well the danger of the woods surrounding his land, stories reverberating through towns of those who vanished in the night. What if there was a gang? What if they were hiding from something terrible? He had faced storms before, rains that blurred the horizon and winds fierce enough to uproot trees, but the storm brewing behind the barn felt far more sinister. He couldn't just turn away, leave them hiding in the dark. Tom took a deep breath, steadying himself as he pushed the heavy barn doors open. They creaked ominously, the sound slicing through the tension. Inside, he could make out the outlines of 3 figures huddled together, fear etched into their faces. The dim light from the moon pooled near their feet, illuminating a girl, no more than 16, sitting beside a boy who looked to be around the same age, with a man huddled and gaunt clutching his arm as if expecting a blow. Tom's voice was firm but carried a thread of compassion. The fear in their eyes was palpable, and he could see the girl shrink back, instinctively turning to the boy. "Please," she whispered, trembling. "We didn't want to trespass." Tom pressed, curiosity mingled with growing concern. The boy, his eyes wide, stepped forward. "There's a gang that's been tracking us. They hurt people like us, people who have lost everything." Tom felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Stories had circulated through town, rumors of gang violence spilling over rural borders, danger creeping in like a thief in the night. It was all starting to come together. This was more than just an intrusion, it was a plea for help. "All right," he said slowly. "You can stay, but you have to be quiet." Relief washed over their faces as they nodded, the man exhaling a shaky breath. Tom led them deeper into the barn, into the shadows where tools and old machinery lay forgotten, remnants of a past life. He could feel the weight of their fear, and it weighed heavy on his heart. He thought of his own family and how he'd move mountains to protect them. "Stay put," he instructed, locking eyes with the man. He stepped outside, the night air biting at his skin, and squinted into the darkness. The wind rustled through the trees, mocking him with its whispers. Was it safe? Moments turned to hours as Tom stood watch. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, a harbinger of things to come. As he gazed at the rolling fields under the moonlight, he began to doubt the wisdom of his decision. What if they were leading him into danger? But before he could shake the thought, a low rumble interrupted the stillness, an engine's growl echoing in the quiet night, growing louder as it approached. "They're coming," Tom spat under his breath, urgency stabbing at his heart. He dashed back inside the barn, the timber creaking beneath his weight. "They're here." The kids' faces turned pale, eyes filled with panic. The man's hands trembled, clenching into fists. The boy asked, desperation breaking his voice. "Follow me," Tom commanded, leading them into a narrow passage between the stacks of hay, hoping against hope that they had enough time. Suddenly, the barn doors burst open, jolting everyone in the room. A group of rough-looking men stepped inside, their faces illuminated only by the fading moonlight. They wore hardened expressions, ruthless and ready for a fight. Barked the leader, his voice like gravel. Tom's heart raced, adrenaline surging. He urged the kids, positioning himself between them and the threat. The gang members began searching the space, kicking up dust and scattering tools with manic energy. Tom glanced back at the teenagers, wide-eyed and frozen in terror. Tom shouted, his voice echoing fiercely against the barn's wooden walls. "You want to find something?" The gang turned, surprise morphing into outrage. "Not as much as you will," Tom replied, the heat of anger coursing through him. He had spent a lifetime building this farm, pouring love and sweat into every inch of it. He would not let it fall into chaos. With a rush of motion, he charged at the nearest thug, the familiar thrill of a fight igniting in his bones. Fists collided with flesh as the barn erupted into pandemonium. He had fought countless storms, but this time his heart was set on protecting lives, something far more profound than mere soil and crops. The scuffle grew intense. Each punch he threw was born from a mix of fear and determination, fueled by the knowledge that behind him stood those who depended on him. The adrenaline pulsing through his veins overshadowed the pain building from blows he took in return. Amidst the chaos, he caught a fleeting glimpse of the girl moving quietly, eyes darting for an escape. He hissed, but her resolve was stronger than fear. Finding a way, Tom grunted, throwing an elbow that knocked one of the attackers back. The gang was quickly losing ground, frustration turning to panic as Tom fought like a bull, channeling every ounce of his spirit into the battle. He roared at the men, every word dripping with righteous fury. But it took just one moment, one careless glance to shift everything. From behind, someone collided with him, sending him crashing to the ground. The air rushed from his lungs, and he blinked against the dust swirling up, the world above him growing fuzzy. The leader towered over him, triumph in his eyes. He sneered, grabbing Tom by the collar. But just as the darkness threatened to close in, a fierce cry pierced through the noise. The girl, a spark of courage, had returned, clutching a rusty wrench, swinging it with all her might. It collided with the leader's head, knocking him off balance. She shouted, desperation ringing in her voice. Tom surged to his feet, springing back into action as the boy grabbed a nearby tool, rallying behind them. With the gang leaders momentarily disoriented, the three turned and rushed toward the barn doors, bursting into the open air. Tom shouted, adrenaline surging through him. The fear driving him was matched only by their determination. They sprinted toward the tree line, the gang behind them scrambling to regain composure and chase them down. The kids were fast, far faster than he expected. Each step they took drew them nearer to freedom. Heart pounding, he trailed behind, fear mingling with a burgeoning hope. He urged, breathless. Just as the safety of the trees came into focus, gunshots rang out behind them, echoing like thunder in his ears. Tom yelled, pushing them forward, every instinct screaming for them to run. Branches snapped underfoot as they bounded into the shadows, the forest quickly swallowing their figures. Tom halted, his breath catching, as he pivoted back to face the barn, heart racing. He shouted, his voice strained as he turned to follow the kids into the abyss of the woods. They stumbled into the deeper darkness, fear pulsing in every heartbeat, adrenaline bolstering their determination. The trees rose high around them, becoming both a sanctuary and a barrier. Together, they breathed a sigh of relief, momentarily lost in the protection of the wilderness. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling of dread. They couldn't linger too long, the gang would surely come searching, relentless in their pursuit. The boy asked, his voice trembling with terror, looking up at Tom with a plea in his eyes. Tom replied, steeling himself as he scanned the area. Hours passed as they huddled together amidst the trees, the sounds of the forest lulling them into a fragile calm. The night air was cool and still, but their hearts thudded like drums, anticipation twisting inside them. Just before dawn, a sound cut through the stillness, the crunch of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Tom's heart sank, recognizing the familiar rhythm of the gang moving through the woods. He urged. As they stealthily picked their way through the foliage, the dawn began to break, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. A new day was creeping in, but it felt as though the darkness would never relent. Tom pointed as they climbed a small ridge. They crouched behind a cluster of rocks, hearts racing, breath caught in their throats. As the shadows continued to seep away, the gang's figures emerged, searching wildly. One of the men shouted, his voice trembling with frustration. Tom felt the adrenaline push through him once more as he silently gestured for the kids to stay low. His heart hummed with determination, and he could see it was time to fight back. He'd protect this new family he had found, no matter the cost. And as the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, illuminating the path ahead, he felt the resolve solidify. They had the leverage of light now, and fear no longer held them captive. With strategy and purpose, Tom motioned his plan as the gang continued to grow frantic. They would turn the tide here. Together, they remained in hiding, watching as the sun rose higher, revealing the rich tapestry of the land before them. It was more than a fight for survival. It was a fight for a new beginning. As dawn broke over the horizon, illuminating the battles yet to come, Tom knew one thing for sure: he would no longer stand alone. Together, they would rewrite their destinies, emerging from the darkness forged into something stronger. With the strength of the rising sun bolstering him, he took a deep breath, readying himself for the fight ahead. Because now the darkness knew everyone could see it, and he wouldn't let it win. The night was thick with silence, interrupted only by the low rustle of leaves in the wind. The moon hung high, casting a ghostly glow over the sprawling fields of a small farm on the edge of town. It was peaceful, almost idyllic, but out in the distance, shadows flitted between the trees. Something was amiss. Tom, the farmer, had lived on this land for nearly his whole life. He knew every inch of it: the craggy old barn, the long rows of crops, the tricks the soil could play. But tonight, as he rocked gently on his porch with a mug of coffee warming his hands, an unsettling feeling twisted in his gut. There was a tension in the air, a heavy pulse that spoke of something lurking just beyond his sight. He set his mug down, feeling the coolness of the wood beneath his palm. Taking measured steps, he walked toward the edge of his property, eyes trained on the shadows. There it was again, a flicker, a movement too quick to be just a trick of the light. Heart beating faster, he pressed forward. As he got closer to the barn, he noticed 3 figures huddled together, barely visible in the gloom. They moved with urgency, darting low to the ground, their silhouettes distorted against the backdrop of the night. A wave of instinct rose within him. There was a darkness here far more threatening than the night. Tom called out, his voice ringing clear, stirring the air. The figures froze, their heads whipping around in his direction. A voice called back, shaky and breathless. Tom felt the weight of the words seep into him. He stepped closer, resolving to confront whatever was hidden in the darkness. The figures began to take shape as they moved into the moonlight: a teenage girl, a younger boy, and a man whose eyes were wide with panic. Tom asked, sensing the urgency lurking beneath the surface. The girl gasped, her voice breaking. "A gang, they've been following us for days." A chill ran down Tom's spine. The town had whispered about that gang, known for their ruthless methods and the fear they spread through the rural areas. The remnants of snores escaped from his chest as he pieced it together. These kids were running for their lives. "All right," Tom said, determination setting his jaw. "You can hide in the barn, but you have to be quiet." Relief washed over their faces as they nodded quickly, moving with a sense of urgency. Tom felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him as he led them into the barn. Once inside, he gestured for them to sit quietly behind a stack of hay bales, the sight of their fear igniting a fierce instinct within him. He walked back outside, shifting through the darkened landscape, eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. The wind whispered ominously through the trees, and in the distance he heard the unmistakable hum of an engine of vehicle, roaring closer to his land. The kids inside the barn were a quiet storm of anxiety, holding their breaths as the sound grew more distinct. Tom's heart raced as he approached the entrance to the barn, nerves tightening. "Stay down," he mouthed to the kids as he pushed the doors open. The sight that met him sent a jolt of adrenaline crashing through his veins, headlights cutting through the dark, 2 cars pulling onto his property. 4 men climbed out, their movements slick with confidence and their faces shadowed beneath caps pulled low. The leader barked, his tone sharp like a knife. Tom's heart sank as the men approached the barn, closing the gap with every moment. He briefly considered his options. Should he confront them, try to drive them away? But beneath that uncertainty was an anchor of resolve. He wouldn't let fear dictate his actions. Suddenly, the gang erupted into the barn, voices echoing off the walls as chaos unfolded. Tom stepped forward, his voice strong. "What do you want?" The leader spun around, a sly smile forming on his lips as he took in Tom's figure. "Just looking for some little runaways," he sneered, stepping closer, looking Tom in the eye. "I'd suggest you leave while you still can," Tom warned, his heart drumming in his chest. The leader's expression shifted from amusement to menace, lips curling like a snake's. At that moment, the tension snapped. Tom charged forward, the instincts of a protector surging through him. He swung his fist at the nearest thug, landing a solid blow that took them both by surprise. Behind him, the kids watched wide-eyed, the man instinctively stepping between them and the chaos. Tom shouted, adrenaline ripping through his words. The gang retaliated instantly, fists flying like a flurry of shadows in the moonlight as Tom fought back, navigating the where mind met muscle in a desperate dance. He felt each hit reverberate through his body, but he didn't let up. He urged, gritting his teeth as he stumbled back to regain his footing. The other thugs were closing in, and Tom could hear the girl's voice quivering from behind the bales. She cried out, terror spilling from her words. Tom shouted, feeling both fear and resolve surge within him. He wouldn't let anything happen to them, he couldn't. This farm held his heart, it held their lives now too. The struggle intensified, men staggering back and forth, fists and fury colliding in the cramped space of the barn. Tom sensed the jagged fear coursing through the children, a raw reminder of their vulnerability. In that chaotic whirlwind, an idea sparked in his mind. He glanced around, counting his options. He needed their assistance. Called to the kids, motioning toward an old pitchfork propped against the wall. With a shaky nod, the boy rushed over, grabbing the pitchfork as Tom took another swing at one of the gang members, sending him crashing into a stack of hay. Tom yelled, pushing himself forward. The boy returned, pitchfork clutched tightly in his hands. He asked, voice quivering as he stood ready, an echo of courage forming in his eyes. Just be brave, Tom encouraged, not just for him, but for everyone in that barn. As the gang pressed closer, it became a frenzy, fists flying, the sound of chaos crashing against the wooden walls. And in a moment of perfect synchronicity, she and the boy leapt forward, ready to support Tom. The pitchfork flew in a desperate arc, finding its mark against the nearest assailant. With each incredible surge of unity, the gang stumbled back, confusion mixing with fury. Tom saw a gap, an opening, and with fierce determination, he pressed through, pushing the man against the wall, strength flowing through his veins like fire. A loud crash echoed in the barn, but Tom wasn't finished. This was their home, their last bastion of safety. Then came the sound of desperate shouting from outside, and Tom felt a lump forming in his throat. The vehicles were still parked close, their engines still running, and more shadows loomed. He yelled as the gang members began to regroup. He beckoned to the kids to follow as panic set in, their limbs stiff and wide-eyed with fear. Tom shouted again, realizing they needed to make their exit. The barn door seemed miles away. Just as they began to move toward the exit, the leader of the gang reemerged, eyes wild and full of fury. He spat, lunging for Tom. Like a bolt of lightning, Tom dodged past him and bolted for the barn doors. The kids followed closely behind, courage overshadowing their fear. Tom urged, adrenaline propelling them through the threshold. They hit the cool night air like a band of warriors charging into battle, sprinting toward the tree line as the first glimmers of dawn began to peek through. Behind them came shouts, crashes, and the roar of engines as the gang scrambled to follow. Legs pumping, they dove into the underbrush, hearts racing as they left the chaos behind. For a moment, the world melted into the rhythm of their thumping hearts and the patter of leaves beneath their feet. They moved instinctively, weaving between trees and darting through the brush. The thrill of survival pulsed through every nerve. Tom couldn't help but glance back, catching glimpses of the thugs attempting to pursue them through the labyrinth of vegetation. The safety of the woods wrapped around them like an embrace, lifting the weight pressing down on their shoulders. Finally, they came to a clearing, panting heavily as they collapsed behind a thicket. The quiet was profound, an oasis amidst the chaos they had just fled. But their respite was temporary, the fear still crackling in the air. The boy gasped, breathless and shaken. "We keep moving," Tom said firmly, determination coursing through him. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for the present. "There's a cabin not far from here." As they stole glances at one another, hope cracked through the weight of fear. The kids nodded, bolstered by Tom's confidence, and they set off once more through the underbrush, hearts full of courage. The cabin came into view, a modest structure framed by trees, Tom's family retreat, a place once filled with laughter and warmth, now a sanctuary in their darkest hour. With quick movements, they rushed inside, freedom washing over them like a wave. Tom sorted through the cabin, gathering supplies, everything within arm's reach, reminding him of the love this place held. He called, tossing some blankets and water bottles toward the kids. "Take what you need." As the sun began to rise, casting a golden hue over everything, they sat together, bodies wound tightly with fear, but deep down, strength coiled dangerously beneath their vulnerability. The girl asked softly, her eyes reflecting uncertainty. "We fight back," Tom asserted, voice strong. "We don't let fear control us, we find a way forward." They looked at him, the solidity of his resolve anchoring their own instincts. For the first time since this nightmare began, they were not just escapees, they were fighters, standing on their own 2 feet against the storm. As dawn broke on a new day, the air filled with promise. Beneath the weight of turmoil lay the seeds of courage, and they would nurture that fire. They had faced the darkness and risen as one. In that modest cabin, in the warmth of the morning sun, they made a pact, not just to survive, but to reclaim their lives, to push back against the shadows threatening to consume them. Tom caught a glimpse of their faces, determination shining brighter than fear. Together, they would find peace again, battling against the night until light flooded their lives, illuminating the pathways leading them toward hope and healing. They would show the world that even in the deepest of darkness, glimpses of light were never truly extinguished. and they would rise, stronger than they had ever imagined. A chill swept through the air as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie twilight over the quiet fields. Tom, the farmer, leaned against the porch railing of his old farmhouse, cradling a steaming mug of coffee. The familiar scent wafted up, grounding him, but his instincts hummed with unease. The usual songs of crickets after sunset fell silent, the world around him feeling strangely still. He took a sip, the warmth spreading through him, but his gaze remained fixed on the distant barn. Something was off. The shadows moving near the edge of the structure were too swift, too deliberate. Before he could process the unease twisting in his gut, he set his mug aside and stepped off the porch. Each footfall crunched softly against the gravel pathway as he moved toward the barn. With every step, the stillness grew heavier, wrapping around him like a shroud. The figures lurking in the gloom caught his eye again, and he squinted into the thickening darkness. They were low to the ground, darting with urgency. He felt a flicker of anxiety. Who dared to trespass on his land under the cover of night? He shouted, his voice booming into the silence, startling the shadows. They froze, their motions jerking like startled animals. Tom's heart raced as they turned towards him. 3 figures emerged from the darkness, 2 teenagers and an older man, each one clearly frightened. The girl exclaimed, her voice trembling. Tom echoed, taking a cautious step forward. "There's a gang after us," the older man said, eyes wide with panic. The words hit Tom like a punch to the gut. He had heard the whispers in town, stories of a ruthless gang terrorizing the outskirts, driving fear into the hearts of anyone who crossed their path. With a deep breath, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was no stranger to hard work and sacrifice. He wasn't about to turn away anyone in need. "All right, you can hide in the barn, but you have to be quiet. I can't protect you if they find you," Tom instructed, gesturing for them to follow. Relief washed over their faces, and they hurried toward the barn, staying low as though the shadows themselves would swallow them whole. Tom stepped inside, closing the heavy doors behind him. The scent of hay and old wood enveloped them, and he felt the palpable tension in the air. "Stay behind those bales and stay silent," he urged, locking eyes with the older man. He turned, ready to keep guard, but the knot of apprehension tightened further. Outside, he could hear the wind rustling through the trees, but there was something else, a low rumble growing in the distance. As he stepped outside again, the sound morphed into the unmistakable hum of an engine. His heart raced, a primal instinct kicking in. They were coming. Tom moved quickly, peering out into the darkness as headlights cut through the night, revealing a pair of vehicles pulling onto his property. The imposing silhouettes of men emerged, their intentions wrapped in shadows. Barked a tall man, his voice sharp and commanding. Panic surged in Tom's chest. The gang was here. He needed to act fast. He turned back to the barn, feeling the weight of the kids' lives hanging in the balance. He whispered urgently, and the kids huddled closer together, eyes wide with fear. As the gang began to invade the barn, searching with predatory precision, Tom knew he had to confront them. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. The world beyond those doors had turned chaotic, and he refused to let that chaos claim anyone inside this place. With a steady voice, he stepped forward, confronting the men. "You need to leave." The leader's eyes roamed over him, amusement creeping across his features. He sneered, stepping closer menacingly. Tom clenched his fists, determination radiating from him. With that, he charged, adrenaline kicking in as he swung at the first thug. The cracking sound of flesh meeting flesh echoed in the barn, and the other gang members flinched back in surprise. As the fight erupted, the barn transformed into a battleground. Tom took blows and landed them in return. The chaos swirled around him as hisses and shouts filled the air. He felt the weight of his life flood through him, the years spent tilling the land, building this life, and now it was all on the line. He yelled as he delivered another punch, sweat drenching him, breath coming in quick bursts. He could scarcely hear the sounds of the kids, their fear and confusion mixing with the malevolent energy in the barn. Everything seemed an endless blur, the gang members growing frantic as they struggled to take Tom down. He could feel his muscles burning, but he didn't care. He had faced many storms on this farm, but nothing compared to this. One of the gang members shouted, frustration rippling through his voice. The gang leader bellowed, and with a swift movement, he maneuvered around Tom, slamming him into a stack of hay bales. Stars burst behind Tom's eyes as he gasped for air. But just as he began to lose hope, he heard a voice, a cry full of bravery echo from behind him. The girl shouted, her courage ignited in those desperate moments. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of her and the boy moving, pitchfork in hand, rushing at the leader with a fury he had never seen. The clash of metal on bone resounded, and Tom felt renewed energy surge through him. "Push back," he shouted, rallying against the overwhelming odds. With the kids now fighting alongside him, the tide shifted. Each punch thrown, every weapon swung, sent shockwaves of fear through the gang. They could sense their slipping control, their bravado fading as Tom and the kids unified against them. Tom pivoted, throwing punches and kicks with newfound determination, his anger fueled not just by fear, but by the realization that they were fighting for something precious. A spark of hope ignited in the air. They were no longer just victims, they were warriors fighting for their lives, but the fight wasn't over yet. The barn doors loomed heavy with the weight of every struggle, and outside he could hear the sound of engines growing louder. The gang was not alone. "Out," he yelled, pushing forward as the gang regrouped, their eyes bulging with temper. In a flurry of movement, Tom wrestled toward the exit, adrenaline coursing through him. Behind him, the kids followed, their resolve igniting in the heat of the moment. He shouted, bursting through the barn doors into the cool night air. The world outside felt alive with danger, the vehicles parked close by, ready to hunt. Tom could feel the fear rising in his throat, but he knew he had to help them escape. They darted through the open fields, the cool grasses whispering against their legs as they raced toward the tree line in the distance. The roar of engines followed them, sending a fresh wave of urgency rippling through their legs. Tom urged, fear suddenly fanning outwards around them. They pushed forward into the darkness, adrenaline pushing pain deep within them. Twigs snapped underfoot, branches snagging at their clothes as they plunged deeper into the woods, heartbeats pounding like drums. The boy gasped, desperation clinging to his words. Tom urged, not daring to look back, adrenaline surging with each desperate step they took deeper into the trees. The darkness surrounded them, but so did the trees. For a moment, there was a brief solace in the thick underbrush, a protective wall that muffled the sounds of the chaos behind them. The girl asked, panting heavily. Tom turned toward her, feeling the weight of their fear settle upon his shoulders. "We find the cabin," he pressed, his voice strong, shooting splintering hope back into them. With the distant sounds of shouting fading behind them, they made their way deeper into the woods, moving cautiously, hearts pounding in rhythm with the rustling leaves. Finally, they reached the cabin, a modest structure nestled within the trees. Tom pushed the door open, and they stumbled inside, breathless and awash with relief. The familiar scent of his family's retreat enveloped them, grounding them in the moment. "Stay low," he instructed, his heart still pounding fiercely. "We'll figure out how to get through this." The kids nodded, adrenaline still churning in their veins. They could feel the weight of potential safety, but it was fragile, like a thin veil over an unstoppable storm. Tom shifted into action, gathering supplies, every second counting as they prepared for whatever might come next. He felt a warmth radiating from the kids as they sat close together, and for the first time, hope began to flicker through the dread that had oppressed them all night. The girl whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. "For now," Tom answered, and he could see their resolve bolstering, the flickers of strength igniting within their fears. He stepped outside, peering into the night, eyes scanning for threats. How long would it be before the gang came looking for them? But as he stood amidst the trees, surveying the landscape, he felt renewed strength push through him. Righteousness coursed like fire within his veins as he turned back toward the cabin and the kids. "If they come, we won't back down," he declared, voice steady. The girl nodded, eyes shining with determination. "We can fight together." At that moment, Tom felt a powerful surge of pride. They were more than mere victims, and he was reminded of the spirit that existed in that very moment, in that cabin where grounded strength met the force of fear. As night gave way to dawn, the world outside began to brighten with golden light, not just from the sun rising, but from the possibilities swirling within that small space. They were warriors, united in their shared struggle, finding hope amidst turmoil. Tom cast a final glance at the cabin. This land wasn't just his, it was their home now, their haven. And as he stood amongst them, breathing deep with determination, he realized that together they could face even the darkest storms. Resilience was their strongest weapon, forged through fear and burnished in the fires of hope. The battle wasn't over, but they would continue to fight until every ounce of darkness had been cast aside. With hearts entwined and spirits renewed, they prepared to rise against whatever was coming. They were no longer hidden shadows, afraid of the dark. Now they were the light, ready to break the silence and fight for their freedom. The wind howled through the trees, carrying a note of urgency that pierced the stillness of the countryside. Tom, the farmer, stood on his porch, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, gazing out over his land. The fields were bathed in moonlight, transforming the familiar landscape into a canvas of shadows. But tonight, something felt wrong. As the chill in the air seeped into his bones, he felt an unease settle in his gut. A flicker of movement caught his eye just beyond the edge of the barn. Something was unmistakably there. His heart raced as he focused, catching glimpses of figures darting low to the ground, trying to blend into the darkness. His instincts kicked in. What were they doing? He shouted, voice steady but tinged with authority. Fear flashed in the figures, and they snapped around to face him. Three shadows emerged: a teenage boy with wild hair, a girl whose wide eyes glimmered with panic, and a man who seemed older and weary, as if burdened by the weight of the world. "Please," the boy called, his voice trembling. Tom felt the knot in his stomach twist tighter. He asked, stepping off the porch, a protective instinct rising within him. He scanned their faces, searching for the truth. "From the gang," the man replied, breathing heavily. A shiver ran down Tom's spine. He had heard rumors of a gang terrorizing nearby towns, people disappearing and lives left in ruins. The darkness surrounding the figures was now more than just night. It was a reminder of the dangers lurking at the edges of his quiet farm. "All right," he said, a resolve hardening in his chest. "You can hide in the barn, but you have to be quiet." Relief washed over their faces like sunlight breaking through the clouds. They hurried toward the barn, slipping into the shadows like phantoms. Tom listened as they shuffled inside. He stepped back onto the porch, eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. The world felt like it was holding its breath. What if the gang was already on their way? Adrenaline kicked in and his heart began to pound like a drum. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of engines broke the silence, rumbling through the night. Tom's stomach dropped as he peered into the distance headlights cut through the darkness. Blood ran cold. The gang had arrived. He took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage. He shouted, rushing back into the barn. The kids huddled together, wide-eyed and terrified, as Tom slammed the barn doors shut. "You need to stay quiet," he urged, his voice a fierce whisper. Tom moved toward the cracked window, peering out to gauge the situation. Figures spilled out of the vehicles, their movements sharp and aggressive. He could see their faces hardened, ruthless, eyes scanning for any sign of weakness. The leader barked, frustration evident in his tone. Tom's heart raced. He could feel the tension crackling in the air, thick enough to choke on. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle to protect lives that depended on him. With quick determination, he stepped back, preparing to confront the threat. "You got to be tough," he murmured to himself, heart pounding in rhythm with the chaos. "Come on out," the gang leader yelled, anger dripping from his words. The barn doors creaked open dramatically as the gang swarmed inside like wolves hunting prey. Tom straightened, ready to defend the fragile lives that had sought refuge under his care. He demanded, voice steady even as fear clawed at him. "Just looking for some little runaways," the leader sneered, his smirk sending a chill down Tom's spine. With a surge of defiance, Tom stepped forward, fists clenched. In an instant, chaos erupted. Tom charged, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he threw the first punch. The sensation of impact resonated through him, and for a moment he felt invincible. He was fighting not just for himself, but for those hiding in the shadows behind him. The struggle was visceral, fists collided and bodies moved like a flurry of shadows under the barn's dim light. He could hear the children's frightened gasps behind him, but that only fueled his determination. He had faced countless storms in his life, this one was no different. One of the gang members shouted, their panic growing, creating a crack in their bravado. The leader growled, but Tom pushed back harder. Every punch, every kick was a testament to his resolve. But as the fight wore on, the gang regained their footing. The numbers were against him. Two men began to wear Tom down, landing brutal blows. The room spun, and for a moment he felt lightheaded. But then he thought of the kids, their fear, the hope in their eyes. That thought ignited a fierce fire within him. He roared, summoning every last ounce of strength, and pushed back, managing to throw one of the thugs aside. The boy cried suddenly, a rush of fear slicing through the chaos. Tom turned just in time to see the girl grab a nearby pitchfork, charging at the leader with a fierce determination in her eyes. It was a brave, reckless decision, but it sparked something within Tom. Tom shouted, momentum seizing him. He rallied, launching himself forward, feeling the energy shift as they fought side by side against their attackers. The barn was alive with frantic energy as tables turned, and Tom felt the tide shifting. Every punch the girl landed, every thrust of the pitchfork fueled their determination. They were powerful, united against the darkness. Tom shouted, heart surging with renewed courage. In those moments of shared struggle, he realized they were no longer just frightened kids hiding in the shadows. They had become a unit, a force rising against their oppressors. The struggle unfolded like a well-rehearsed dance, and even as adversaries loomed, light began to seep through. But just when victory felt within reach, the leader pushed closer, shoving Tom aside, knocking him to the ground. Stars exploded in his vision, the world spinning as the air rushed from his lungs. "Now you're going to regret ever crossing paths with us," the leader sneered, stepping over him, ready to claim his victory. But just as despair began to creep in, he heard the girl's voice rise above the chaos. She shouted, and with that, their resolve pushed through the darkness. She had turned the tide, and Tom's heart soared with hope. With a quick movement, she thrust the pitchfork with all her might, catching the leader off guard and knocking him back. She yelled, urgency driving every word. Tom scrambled to his feet, adrenaline flooding him once more, and he surged forward into the fray. He led the way toward the barn doors, the kids flooding behind him. Each step felt heavier, hearts racing wildly as they shot back into the night. He urged, pushing them forward, fear melting into determination. They burst from the barn into the cool evening air, leaving the chaos behind. Once outside, they ran for the trees, limbs pumping instinctively. The sounds of rage and chaos faded as the cover of night enveloped them, providing both safety and urgency. They navigated through the underbrush, stumbling over roots, twigs snapping beneath their feet. The darkness seemed alive, pressing around them, but Tom felt them pushing forward. Hope sparked in every shared breath as they sprinted deeper into the woods. The boy gasped, glancing back. Tom urged, adrenaline surging as they sprinted deeper into the unknown. The canopy of trees loomed overhead, protecting them from the malevolent eyes that had chased them through the night. Tom could feel the urgency of their movements, the need to escape burning in his chest. But as they reached a small clearing, he called for them to stop. He needed to assess their surroundings, to breathe. "Let's hide here and catch our breath," he whispered, scanning the area for any signs of danger. They slumped against a tree, gasping for air as moonlight filtered down through the leaves, illuminating their faces. It was a small respite from the terror that had engulfed them. The girl asked, fear lingering in her voice. Tom took a deep breath, steadying himself as he contemplated their options. The roughness of the night pressed around them, but it was tempered by the realization that they had fought together and survived. "We keep moving," he said firmly. "There's a cabin nearby, my family's old hunting lodge." With renewed determination, they stood together, shaking off the weariness that clung to them. The flicker of hope ignited within them like a flame, bright and defiant against the night. As they pressed deeper into the woods, the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet became their rhythm, each step solidifying their resolve. With Tom guiding them, they navigated through the trees, hearts racing yet steady with purpose. Finally, in the distance, the silhouette of the cabin materialized, a sanctuary nestled amidst the wilderness. Tom pointed, urging everyone forward. The moment they reached the cabin, a wave of relief washed over them. Inside, the cool air greeted them, mixed with the scent of wood and earth. It felt both familiar and safe, like a long-lost friend opening their arms wide. "Stay close," Tom instructed, moving swiftly to gather supplies. The adrenaline still buzzed in his veins, but he knew they couldn't let their guard down yet. The boy asked, eyes wide with uncertainty. "They'll have to get through me first," Tom replied, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. "We're not running anymore." The words hung in the air, solid as stone. He saw the resolve strengthen in their eyes, a flicker of courage igniting. They had faced the darkness and emerged on the other side, stronger than before. With the early morning light beginning to creep through the cracks in the cabin walls, they huddled together, hearts joined in solidarity. The girl asked, the weight of the world reflected in her expression. The sun began to rise, spilling light into the cabin, illuminating their faces. It was a new day, full of possibilities. They had fought hard, clawing their way out of despair, and now they would turn to face whatever came next together. The gang would not win. Tom felt that truth rally deep within him. They had come too far, fought too hard. Survival rested not only in hidden shadows, but in the courage to rise against the light. With the dawn as their witness, they stood united, ready to reclaim their lives as the shadows of fear faded away. The darkness had tried to swallow them, but the light burned brighter still. The wind whispered through the fields, carrying scents of damp earth and fading daylight. Tom, a lifelong farmer, stood on his porch, cradling a steaming mug of coffee as he surveyed his land. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cornstalks waving softly in the breeze. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that encouraged thoughtfulness and gratitude. But tonight, an inexplicable feeling gnawed at him, a sense of unease lurking just beyond sight. As the last bits of sunlight slipped away, the darkness began to engulf the farm. Moments passed, quiet and still, when something caught the corner of his eye. A shadow flitted between the barn and the trees. He squinted, narrowing his gaze to pierce through the encroaching blackness. What had he just seen? He set down his coffee and stepped away from the familiar safety of the porch. Tom called out, voice steady yet tinged with concern. The wind shifted slightly, leaving him feeling more exposed with each breath. In that moment, he caught another flicker, this time more pronounced, a figure crouching low, edging toward the barn with an urgency that set his instincts aflame. Before he had a chance to make sense of it, he bolted toward the barn, heart pounding like a drum. The air thickened around him, a heavy silence wrapping the world in anticipation. His steps were intentional, each footfall crunching against the gravel path as he neared the barn doors. Tom shouted, a blend of authority and curiosity in his voice. The figures froze, their movements still as death. He could barely see them from where he stood, but the tension in the air was palpable. He stepped closer, enough that the silvery moonlight poured onto the ground, revealing shapes huddled together. His gut twisted. These were no simple trespassers. "Please," a girl's voice broke through the dark, filled with raw fear. Tom's heart raced as the figures stepped forward. Two teenagers, wild-eyed with terror, stood beside a man whose weathered face told the story of a man who'd faced hardships he shouldn't have to bear. Tom asked, eyeing them carefully. He needed to know if they were a threat or simply victims of circumstance. "We're running from a gang," the older boy blurted out, breathless. "They've been chasing us for miles." His stomach sank as he recalled the rumors swirling through the town. The gang's ruthless acts had sent shivers down the spines of many, stories of violence and fear that trailed them like shadows. "All right," Tom said, his voice shifting to something firmer. "You can hide in the barn, but you need to be quiet." Relief washed over their faces as they rushed past him, and Tom could hear the hurried whispers exchanged among them, hearts pounding, souls hoping. As he closed the barn doors behind them, that gut-wrenching feeling returned. Were they really safe in here? Tom knew a storm was brewing, and he sensed he'd need to face it head-on. Peering through a crack in the barn doors, he scanned the field silhouetted against the night sky, waiting. The seconds stretched into infinity. Just then, the rumble of engines shattered the quiet. His heart dropped. The gang was closer than he thought. He yelled back toward the kids, adrenaline coursing through his body as shadows danced outside the barn. He could see headlights swooping toward his property, cutting through the night like daggers. Tom had a decision to make. His instincts screamed for him to flee, to protect what he had built on this land. But he couldn't abandon these kids. They needed him. With a deep breath, Tom pushed the barn doors open just as the vehicles parked just beyond the threshold. Figures jumped out, their silhouettes stark against the cold gleam of headlights. The leader barked, his voice strong with authority and malice. Tom felt a surge of urgency. The kids were vulnerable, hidden only by the weak shelter of the barn. He had to stall them, divert them. He called, stepping into the open, hands raised to show he meant no harm. This is private property. The leader turned, surprise etched on his face. A scoff escaped his lips, revealing the arrogance of someone who had always gotten what they wanted. With a nod from the leader, the gang surged forward. Tom's heart thundered in his chest as he thrust himself into the fray. Fists were flying, bodies colliding in a clash that felt surreal. Every punch brought back memories of the struggles he'd faced on his land. This was his refuge, and he'd felt his foundation shake too many times to let this happen again. As the fight raged on, the shadows shifted around him. The air crackled with tension, and adrenaline blurred the edges of fear. For a brief moment, he felt like a warrior, each blow a reminder of the power of resilience. But the gang wasn't backing down, and even as Tom fought, he could hear their frustrated shouts growing louder. "Search the barn," he called to the kids, the urgency in his voice pulling at their hearts. He needed to give them a chance. He had to hold them off for just a little longer while they found a way out. One of the gang members charged at him, fists swinging. Tom ducked just in time, the blow missing him by a hair. But the movement knocked him off balance, and suddenly he found himself on the ground, panting and struggling to regain control. The leader stepped forward, loomingly confident. "Look at you, old man." Tom's eyes roamed the barn behind him. He could see flickering flashes of life in those shadows were the kids, scared yet ready, and that flame inside him blazed hotter. "You'll have to get through me," he managed to choke out, despite the weight of defeat lapping at his heels. Before he could react, a cry rang out from within the barn. It was the girl, her voice piercing the chaos. Tom pushed himself to his feet, instinctively spinning to see the kids break from the barn, charging into the night. A spark of hope ignited within him. They were moving. As they fled, the gang sprang into action, but Tom wouldn't let them pass. He positioned himself between the runaway teens and the gang, fists clenched, confidence swelling even as the odds pressed against him. He bellowed. The kids slipped past him, the boy and girl darting into the trees with a determination that breathed life into Tom once more. While he maintained the fight, he could feel their presence rooted within him, and that sense of purpose transformed into raw power. He fended off their attacks with surprising energy, his mind repeating one mantra: the farm was worth fighting for. But just when it felt like he might hold them back, a blow landed squarely on his back, sending him sprawling to the ground. The world spun around him, disorienting, and he could hear their footsteps rushing behind him. The leader shouted, urgency gnawing at his voice. Realizing they were turning their attention away, Tom pushed himself back up, aching but driven. Didn't have much time left, he shouted, catching the attention of the kids who had hesitated at the tree line. "Run!" As they sprinted off into the darkness, Tom took a desperate step forward, trying to buy more time. He yelled toward the gang, the defiance of his words echoing into the night, but the gang members surged, angry and relentless. Just as Tom prepared to make one last stand, the sound of sirens pierced the air, bright and blaring, growing closer. Relief washed over him like a storm. The cavalry was coming. The gang froze for an instant, their eyes darting between Tom and the weight of the approaching danger. The leader screamed, pointing wildly. Before Tom could even process the shift, the gang turned on their heels and dashed toward their vehicles, scrambling to escape before the law arrived. Shouted one of the thugs. Embarrassment splattered across his face as he climbed into the truck, leaving Tom with only a fleeting victory. And in those frantic moments, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving him breathless and shaken. He had fought for their lives, and they had escaped, but at what cost? As the gang tore off into the night, he caught a glimpse of the kids' faces peeking through the trees, their expressions mixed with relief and lingering fear. He urged, waving them toward him. They hurried over, hearts racing, and Tom ushered them back toward the safety of the trees. The sounds of sirens faded, but he knew this wasn't the end. Suddenly, a chilling thought struck him. Panic surged as he scanned the area, but the shadows seemed to swallow everything whole. He repeated, looking deeper into the woods. The girl's face drained of color as she began to tremble. Tom shouted, resolve igniting within him again. With newfound determination, he broke into a sprint toward the barn. The darkness felt heavier now, like a suffocating blanket, but he refused to let it consume him. He would not abandon anyone to the shadows. As they approached the barn, the air grew thick with tension. The heavy doors stood ajar, a portal to the unknown that awaited inside. Tom barked, charging into the dimly lit space. The barn felt alive with echoes, the shadows stretching and shifting as he stepped inside. He called out, voice reverberating off the wooden walls. For a moment, all he heard was his own heartbeat, pulsing in rhythm with fear. Then from the darkness he heard something, a muffled sound, barely perceptible yet full of urgency. A voice called faintly, echoing from a far corner. Tom's stomach dropped. Without thinking, he rushed towards it, eyes scanning the shadows for the source. The adrenaline surged through him. Time felt suspended as he pushed through straggling hay bales and overturned crates. The voice grew clearer. With a final push, Tom reached the corner, heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. There, tangled among the scattered hay, lay the boy, the very same kid who had first pleaded for safety. Fear raced in his eyes as he struggled to pull himself free, battered and frightened. Tom urged. He knelt beside the boy, untangling the hay from him while casting quick glances back toward the barn doors. The tension still hung thick in the air as every second felt like an eternity. He muttered, his hands working quickly. With one last yank, he pulled the boy free, and together they tumbled backward just as the barn doors swung open. Darkness rushed in, hostility creeping around them. Tom shouted. They bolted from the barn, fear clawing at their heels as they flew into the night. The group burst through the tree line, hearts racing, breathless with adrenaline and terror, the headlights approaching once more. He screamed, desperation fueling his command, yet every instinct within him begged to turn and fight, because out there in the dark they had tried to hide, but the danger wasn't done with them yet. As the engines grew louder, Tom could feel the weight of the night pressing in, the unknown stretching before them. Shadows loomed, and he had never felt more alive, yet more terrified. They had escaped, but the storm was far from over. And there, in the depths of the darkness, the gang was hunting again. They had come for blood, and this time he would need to confront the very shadows that threatened to swallow them whole. How far would he go to protect those he had just met? The answer sat heavy in his heart as the headlights bore down on them, illuminating the path ahead, a stark reminder that the night was still young and the fight was far from over.